And so we finally get to the books that you've chosen. Laura, do you want to kick off with your one?
I've chosen The Cone Gatherers because it's a Scottish book, because it's, I think, about 60 years old now, and I discussed it with my book group today, and I think the fact that it is 60 years old gives it an advantage, or gives us an advantage looking back at it, and that was a big part of our discussion. You know, for instance, if that book was published now, would it be such a gore fest at the end? Actually, I'm giving away. I'm telling you the plot.
Can we really just see? Can you put your hand up if this is a book that you know, The Cone Gatherers by Robin Jenkins? Quite a few people.
Good. Oh, great!
Did you have to do it at school?
So lots of people haven't read it. Well, I can warmly recommend it. I think it's a great book for a book group because it's fairly short. And sometimes, you know, when you've got a busy month and you've got a lot on and you know you've got to finish this book, sometimes it becomes a bit of a chore. It's short, it's punchy. It could be argued that it's simplistic, but it's fairly straightforward. But at the same time, there is the sort of classic struggle between good and evil. There's a lot of, it's set in the Second World War, so there's a lot of class issues. It's kind of nature versus nurture. There's an awful lot in it to discuss in a book group. I think it's a fantastic book. I think at the end, I don't want to give away the ending because so many of you haven't read it. And please, if you do get a copy of it, do not read the foreword because it gives away the ending. Don't read it. It'll spoil the book for you. And then at the end, all the power shifts every 5 minutes. It's a very, very filmic book. And I know that one of our own Scottish novelists, Bernard McClaverty, has been trying for years. He's written a script for it and he's been trying for years to get this produced. It would be such a good film. It would be a wonderful Scottish film. So far, that hasn't happened, but I'd love to see it as a film. So for all those reasons, I think that would be a great book group.
Sue, the book you've chosen is Birds of America by Laurie Moore.
Yes.
Can you sketch on why you chose this one?
Well, it was impossible to choose a book. So it's a ludicrous question, choose a book. I mean, I was recently asked, what's your favourite book? And there just isn't an answer. So I kind of scanned the shelves and just closed my eyes and waited to see what bubbled up to the surface in a vague sort of way. And Laurie Moore, I had recently read her latest novel, A Gate at the Stairs, which some of you may have read. It got a lot of publicity when it came out this year, and I think it's been on various prize lists. But I've chosen Birds of America, which is one of her, I think it was her last collection of short stories. And when I found myself thinking about her writing and the fact that she's best known as a short story writer, I thought, yeah, that's probably good for a book group, because one of the things that people were saying at the group I was invited to was that they find it impossible to find the time to finish the book in time for the group. So I think erroneously thought short stories would be a good type of text to choose for a book group, and within that trying to agree on a story that everybody could read. But in fact, when I thought about it, in some ways reading short stories can be more demanding on your time, in that I think they're best read in one go, and some of them can be really quite long, whereas a novel, which is a very slow unfolding, and that's what's wonderful about novels, is something that's in your control. You can dip in and out of it and just read a couple of pages or whatever. And interestingly, Laurie Moore, when she talks about her writing, says that one of the things that was a difficulty for her as a writer when she was bringing up her son as a writer of short stories was finding the time, because I believe that when she writes a short story, she does it at once. You know, it's one journey, and she kind of writes for something like 20 hours, you know, and then of course, no doubt she'll revisit it. Whereas again, with a novel, you were talking about this earlier, it gains its own momentum and survives without you for a while, and you can dip in and out of it, which is maybe why she's most recently written a novel. But again, why I chose Laurie Moore, I mean, she's a wonderful writer. what I like about Laurie Moore is that she writes about us. She writes about you, she writes about me. She's fascinated by so-called ordinary people leading so-called ordinary lives, and of course there's nothing more extraordinary than that. And she's writing about the things that have happened to you and me. She's writing about families, relationships, divorce, illness, death, happiness, everything that punctuates our life, and does it beautifully and just illuminates things that we can relate to in a way that you recognise so passionately that you feel she's almost looking inside you. You know, she can see you. And any one of us in this room would be a superb topic for a Laurie Moore short story.
Alan, the book that you've chosen is a pretty controversial choice.
It's the most controversial choice there is, really. American Psycho. Has anybody ever
has
read
anyone
this
here
book?
actually read this? If you have a few brave hands
right.
there.
Funnily enough, Laurie Moore, whose stories I love actually, Birds of America is one of my favourite books of short stories ever, detested this book and wrote an extremely negative review of it.
It's going to be a good group, isn't it?
Yeah, and get Caroline Lamb in there, a few drinks. She's on the money in some ways. It's a book that brings out revulsion in people for very particular scenes, very famous scenes, which are extremely graphic and disturbing. But I also think it's a very misunderstood book. As a satire that's razor sharp. It's on the side of the angels, as far as I'm concerned. It's about Reagan's America. And it's a feminist novel. It's about masculine values of vanity and the obsession with power and status and aggression and violence. It's set in Wall Street in the late 1980s, and it's about a character called Patrick Bateman, who's 27 and insanely wealthy. He works as a stockbroker, and by night he tortures his victims. He's a psychopath. But it's not like any other horror novel you've ever read. There's no cliche anywhere in this. It's stylistically the strangest book you've ever read. It's very blank, it's very numb, it's very flat. There's no poetry in the prose whatsoever. You'll get a chapter that will be 6 pages of him describing his beauty routine in the morning in absolute clinical detail. And later in the book you'll get 6 pages of him talking about his favourite Whitney Houston albums. Or you'll get 6 pages of him talking about his workout routine in the gym, and then 6 pages of him torturing a prostitute. And all of these things his world is ironed flat by money. He's got so much money that the value has been emptied out of everything. And some of the dialogue is just absolutely hilarious. There are certain scenes that are very fun. It's a comedy. It's just a very, very black comedy. And I can remember actually doing a reading group up in the Highlands, and they'd been reading my book, Death of a Ladies' Man, and there'd been various discussions about it, disagreements and stuff. And one woman had said, Barbara didn't come tonight because she thinks your book should have been burned. and I said, for God's sake, don't give her American Psycho. It's the most extreme novel there is. But, I mean, some of those sections form a very, very small part of the book, but they were the ones that became famous. But the rest of it is just very funny satire about status and materialism and wealth and brand names.
I've been rereading a book, because it's my sort of guilty pleasure to occasionally have one. Shirley Jackson, who you may know from the film The Haunting of Hill House. But she did a lovely little novel called We Have Always Lived in the Castle that I'd never read. I'd read Jackson's other work. And it is, I think, the most disturbing book I've ever read. Nothing particularly gruesome happens. Everything is very sotto voce and low-key. It's about 2 sisters that live in a house together, Mary Cat, the youngest one, and Constance, her elder sister, and their old uncle who lives with them. And just very gradually, you realise that the whole family's been poisoned, that something dreadful has happened, that the whole village detests them. And you gradually realise that everything you think you know about the case is completely back to front. And it's the most beautifully precise book. And I read it and just started again at the beginning, and it was a completely different book. Once you knew the kind of denouement, you could see how it had been placed very carefully right the way through that those that had eyes that could see would see this whole way. But it made me think that she's a real underrated figure in the history of
She wrote one
American.
of the best short stories of all time, a story called The Lottery.
The Lottery is astonishing.
It's just incredible. The final line will just stop your heart.
Yeah.
It's amazing.